In 1963, Doctor Who began existing. At first, it was a family show largely made to educate children on science and history, with the occasional appearance of some fascist pepperpots to keep things fresh. This formula worked for a good few years, until the lead actor got too ill and started seeing invisible twinks in bow ties while filming, and so the decision was made to replace him with a twink in a bow tie. And boom, British culture is changed forever. With the show's ability to recast the main character once the previous guy decided he'd had enough of being swarmed by greasy nerds every time he went outside, Doctor Who was able to maintain a unique longevity few shows can really achieve. I mean, with the help of regeneration, the show could go on forever, right? So the show was cancelled in 1989. But hey, it brought down Thatcher with it, so 1-1. And aside from a failed reboot in 1996 where the Doctor goes to America and immediately gets shot, it seemed like that was it for Doctor Who. But then those greasy nerds from earlier grew up and took over the TV industry, and boom, Doctor Who is back, baby! Ready to infect a whole new generation of kids with autism. Doctor Who returned to TV in 2005 with a new series starring Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor. It was an overnight success, only further perpetuated by the cultural juggernaut of David Tennant's Doctor. The first 4 series of modern Doctor Who under Russell T Davies are widely regarded as the show's golden age, the time when the show had the most mainstream appeal, when the world made sense.
I don't want to go.
Now, personally, I'm too young to have watched series 1 to 4 as they aired. When Doctor Who came back, I was too busy snorting Calpol or whatever the hell 8-month-old babies do. But I still watched the RTD era religiously growing up, and it's a period of the show I still have a lot of nostalgia for. Series 1 in particular tends to be looked back on very favourably, and is widely considered a pretty excellent reboot of the show. But what made it work so well? Well, join me as we discuss the best polyamorous relationship to ever grace our TV screens. But first, a little backstory. So, for Doctor Who to come back in 2005, it had to have been cancelled in the first place, right? But how did that happen, I hear the voices ask. Well, it starts, as all things do, in the 80s. Doctor Who was celebrating its 20th anniversary in 1983, with the show still doing pretty well. The current 5th Doctor, Peter Davison, overall being a successful follow-up to the incredibly iconic Tom Baker. That year saw the airing of Season 20, in which every episode contained some reference to the show's past, usually by bringing back an old character, before culminating in the big anniversary special, The 5 Doctors, containing a grand total of 3.5 Doctors. Now, all these references to the past are fine for an anniversary year, but it was still important for the show to move forward and not rely on its past all the time. Unfortunately, things did not get much better, particularly with Season 22, of which the first story relies on you remembering the plot of an episode from 19 years prior, only for the show to then bring back the second Doctor, just because. Keep in mind, this was a time before reruns were a common thing, so a lot of younger and more casual viewers may have felt lost and put off by all these callbacks. It seemed like the show was stagnating, with no clear direction or abundance of fresh ideas. That wasn't the only problem the show was facing. The BBC seemed to be actively sabotaging the show, slashing its budget, scheduling it at the same time as Coronation Street to harm the ratings, and even outright trying to cancel it in 1985, before being convinced to bring it back after the lyrical masterpiece that is Doctor in Distress. Fun fact, this song is actually the closest the average person can get to knowing how Robbie Williams' mum felt when she first heard Angels. Controller of BBC One, Michael Grade, considered the show a low-budget, embarrassing relic of the past. He just didn't like the show, or sci-fi in general, and decided that, despite millions of people still enjoying it, his opinion was the only one that mattered, and he would do all he could to ruin the show and get it off the air. He's also a massive Tory. What a surprise. He put the show on an 18-month hiatus in 1985 and basically forced producer John Nathan Turner to sack Colin Baker. The show did get a bit better in the later years, the final 2 seasons of Classic Who being considered a sort of renaissance. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough. And the show ended on the 6th of December 1989, with the Doctor walking off into the wilderness. Time passed, and aside from a 1996 TV movie featuring my dad, Doctor Who remained largely forgotten. But the spark was still there. In 1999, a Doctor Who parody sketch was made for Red Nose Day called The Curse of Fatal Death, which pokes fun at the show in a light-hearted way. Writer Stephen Moffat thought this would be his only chance to ever write for Doctor Who. It was. Wake up, Stephen. The last 20 years have all been a dream. Wake up. In 2003, Doctor Who's 40th anniversary was approaching, and the BBC had no plans for anything special to celebrate the occasion. So a fan-made webcomic series was created, The Scream of the Shalka, starring Richard E. Grant as the Doctor. Fun fact, there were originally plans for Robbie Williams to play the Doctor. As one of the 5 people who saw Better Man in the cinema, that's what the movie was missing, Doctor Who. Also, imagine Robbie Williams' head showing up in Rogue. We were robbed, man. This web series actually tries to establish itself as a potential beginning of a reboot of the show, which was immediately ruined by the official BBC announcement that they would be bringing Doctor Who back. But why did they change their minds so suddenly? Well, like I said at the start of the video, those nerds that grew up watching Doctor Who were in charge now. That, coupled with the success of recent sci-fi shows like Star Trek The Next Generation, The X-Files, and also the success of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, appealing to kids and adults, it was more than enough proof that there was absolutely still a market for this kind of stuff. The revival of Doctor Who was to be managed by Russell T Davies, a lifelong fan of the show, who had risen to prominence as a writer over the last decade, having written Queer as Folk, Casanova, starring David Tennant, and The Second Coming, starring Christopher Eccleston. Also Chucklevision. This reboot was being managed by experienced people in the industry, with ample funding from the BBC, but there was still a lot of pressure for it to be a success, to salvage the show's reputation and bring Doctor Who back bigger than ever. If anything, the TV movie was a good example of what not to do, since it relied heavily on the viewer already knowing a lot about the show.
It was on the planet Skaro that my old enemy, the Master, was finally put on trial. They say he listened.
You know John, lovely fella. Married to Patricia, I think it is. And her mother worked in the credit union, you might remember. Absolutely crippled with the old gallstone, so she was.
If Doctor Who was going to appeal to a whole new audience, it had to essentially be a clean slate, to strip the show back to basics while keeping things fresh. And the casting of the new Doctor sold that idea perfectly. Christopher Eccleston was mainly known as an actor who played serious roles, so the idea of him playing the wacky and kid-friendly Doctor seemed unlikely to Davies. They'd already worked together on Davies's miniseries The Second Coming, which led to Eccleston being interested in the reboot of Doctor Who, believing Davies would provide good television to a young audience. The Ninth Doctor is meant to be a very back-to-basics version of the character, and his clothes reflect that. He doesn't wear any of the eccentric, colourful clothes a lot of his predecessors wore, and he doesn't carry a lot of that grandiose style or attitude. His overall style comes across as a lot more reserved and pragmatic, even down to his accent. The Doctor, up until this point, had always been quite a posh, middle-class sounding bloke, quite eloquently spoken. Even Paul McGann, despite being from Liverpool, would hide his accent and use one more akin to the other Doctors. Eccleston, on the other hand, kept his Salford accent. Suddenly, the Doctor wasn't this posh, middle-class guy. He was a working-class northerner who'd built himself from the ground up. Bloody woke nonsense. The Doctor's new companion for the series was Rose Tyler, played by Billie Piper, who, at this point, was mainly known as a pop singer, the youngest artist to debut with a #1 single. And with that, on the 26th of March 2005, Doctor Who returned to television with the episode Rose. Now, the goal for this reboot was to keep the show grounded and relatable, to try and avoid alienating the audience, and that intention is made clear in Rose. The whole episode is told from the perspective of Rose, an ordinary 19-year-old. I think. I don't know, man, I'm a Doctor Who fan. You think I hang out with people my age? We see everything through her eyes, her ordinary life, and she's in an interracial relationship? Well, 100 seconds in and Doctor Who has already gone woke. Pack it up, everyone. No, but genuinely, this is a great way of setting up the episode. It's fast-paced, shows us pretty much everything we need to know about Rose and her life, and establishes that the story will be told through her eyes. Russell T Davies's original run of Doctor Who heavily centered around the grounded, relatable storytelling, and that becomes apparent here. Even the very first shot of the episode almost aims to subvert your expectations. We begin with a shot of space, flooding the viewer's mind with possibilities of where and when we could be, only for us to zoom in on a 19-year-old's bedroom. That sounds really bad. But everything in this introduction serves to keep your expectations in check, only for the episode to immediately let us know that alien things can still happen on Earth too. Just before the shop closes, Rose has to give lottery money to a guy called Wilson. Little does she know, she's about to win a lottery of her own, as her job gets blown up. Oh, also she meets this northerner with a bomb, but I'm sure there's no connection there. The Doctor is portrayed as a mysterious, almost magical person, giving cryptic speeches about who he is and vanishing without a trace, which is how it must feel for everyone who only meets him in passing. He rejects any chance of Rose getting to know him. I mean, he's been very alone for a while at this point, and is very sad, for reasons we'll discover soon. But this is a great way to portray the Doctor at the start. It puts a level of mystery into his presence that we arguably hadn't seen since the very first episode. And that's what Series 1's portrayal of the Doctor is largely about, putting the Who back in Doctor Who, which is something I'll come back to.
Stitch this, mate.
So Rose, obsessed with tracking down this mystifying man, takes to the internet, and eventually she finds Clive, the peak of humanity, who has a whole shed dedicated to researching the Doctor. You could see him as an allegory for fans of Classic Who, obsessing over this guy they only get fleeting glimpses of, overwhelming and alienating new fans with all their theories and backstory. So yeah, the Doctor's companion is pretty much always the audience surrogate, and that's what Rose represents, particularly new fans just discovering the Doctor for the first time. And that's how we see him at first, cold and distant. But then we spend more time with him throughout the episode and discover he's cold and distant. Rose is characterized well here, being a smart, observant, and caring person, which you can see in this scene. When Plastic Mickey, the best character of the entire show, starts attacking the restaurant, Rose could just run, but decides to pull the fire alarm to save everyone else in the building. It's just an impulse she has after seeing the attack, showing how she is a naturally considerate person. The Doctor and Rose's relationship isn't perfect. Rose is frustrated with the Doctor being cryptic and not taking the time to consider all the ordinary lives around him. One of the Doctor's core traits is compassion, always highlighting the importance of everyone, so his apathy that gets called out by Rose makes his progression over the next few series very apparent, as well as showing what happens when the Doctor detaches himself from humanity for too long. Making your protagonist rude and somewhat unlikable at the start is definitely a risky move, but it ends up making the Ninth Doctor's arc all the more satisfying by the end. There's also Mickey, who is in this episode. He's mainly just here so we have someone to compare Rose to prove she's worthy of travelling with the Doctor, but he actually has a personality.
Hey, here's my woman. Get off.
Can I use your computer?
Yeah, any excuse to get in the bedroom.
The main villains of the episode are the Autons, living plastic which first appeared in the Third Doctor's first episode, Spearhead from Space, which was apparently a big inspiration in the creation of this episode. The Autons are a pretty good choice for the first villains to use. It's a good callback to Classic Who, while still being a very simple villain to understand, and keeping that grounded, relatable vibe the series is going for. Towards the end, the Doctor is trapped, the Nestine consciousness ready to kill him after discovering he's a Time Lord, as its planet was destroyed in some nameless war that the Doctor apparently had something to do with. But Rose ends up saving him, which is actually a good example of how the show, and our culture in general, was changing. In Classic Who, the Doctor's female companions were pretty much always portrayed as damsels in distress, just there to be completely clueless and stand there screaming or asking questions. Even characters like Sarah Jane and Leela, despite being promised as powerful, independent girl bosses, ended up becoming helpless and objectified over time. This ending, with Rose being the one to save the Doctor, shows straight away that this new version of the show is doing away with all-out sexism. Now, the Doctor needs his companion just as much as they need him. Not just with stuff like defeating the bad guys, but also getting him to open up and be more in touch with his humanity. Is Rose a perfect episode? No. But it's still a pretty great introduction to the series that holds up really well 20 years on. It manages to completely reinvent Doctor Who in the 21st century while not straying too far from its roots. It's a very accessible introduction to the show. It puts a lot of mystery back into the character of the Doctor, which had slowly diminished over the course of Classic Who, and it establishes the Doctor and Rose's chemistry and character arcs really well. Also Clive. So, the very first episode had broadcast, and with an audience of over 10 million, it would seem like the launch had been a massive success. As long as the rest of the series has strong viewing figures, this reboot could actually end up bringing in a new golden age of Doctor Who. As long as nothing goes wrong... Oh, great. Yeah, just a few days after Rose broadcast, it was revealed that Christopher Eccleston would be leaving the show after just one series, due to altercations behind the scenes. Now, there's a lot we still don't know about this situation, and since this is a real situation involving real people, I don't think it's fair to speculate and gossip. So I'm gonna focus on what we do know. The work environment on the set of Series 1 was very chaotic and unprofessional, and Eccleston didn't like the way the higher-ups were behaving and handling everything, being rude to the lower-ranking crew, and there were disagreements on set. He went to the BBC to talk about the issues on set, but they didn't really want to interfere, not wanting to put too much stock into a show they were worried might flop. All this stuff resulted in Eccleston choosing to leave the show quietly. He and the BBC agreed to make their own statements jointly when the time came to announce his departure. Instead, the BBC chose to make their own statement without consulting Eccleston, claiming he left out of fear of being typecast and because he found the filming schedule too tiring. They also put him on a blacklist, basically making it impossible for him to get TV work in the UK for years afterwards. Honestly, I have so much respect for him for pushing through all that stuff and not letting the BBC ruin his career like that. What a legend. Given what we now know about the on-set behaviour of people like Noel Clarke and John Barrowman, yeah, I think calling the work environment unprofessional might be a bit of an understatement. This also seems like a recurring problem with Russell T Davies. Millie Gibson recently spoke about the treatment she experienced while part of the show, all these tabloid rumours being spread about her being fired for being a diva before her first episode had even broadcast, and she wasn't allowed to speak out against these harmful rumours because of spoilers. None of the higher-ups came to her defence at all, and I genuinely find it gross as fuck. To treat your lead actor like this is one thing, but to do it again with your 19-year-old co-lead? I'm not gonna lie, the whole Bad Wolf crew seems very cliquey and toxic, and it's pretty clear that these problems haven't improved in the last 20 years.
Sacked Russell T Davies.
But yeah, with that out of the way, let's carry on with the series. So, the Doctor takes Rose on a trip in the TARDIS, and after seductively pumping the TARDIS console, something he literally never does again for the rest of the show, takes her on her first trip in time and space, to watch her home planet die. Now, I've had some pretty awkward first dates in my time, but this... Actually, come to think of it, one of my first dates was a Lovejoy concert. Rose doesn't know how lucky she's had it. Yeah, this seems like a weird place to take your new 19-year-old friend on her first trip. But this makes perfect sense in terms of the Doctor's current emotions and character. This is the episode where we find out his home planet was destroyed, and this trip to the end of the world is his twisted way of trying to connect with Rose, to try and reach out and get her to understand him while still maintaining his shut-off, angsty persona. The inevitability of death is a heavy, recurring thought on his mind at the minute, and he's still very disconnected from humanity. He seems more interested in showing off in front of Rose more than anything, taking her to some flashy space station in the incredibly distant future, showing her all different aliens, showing her the destruction of her planet. It's almost his way of saying, look how unfazed I am by all this. God, I'm so fucking cool and mysterious and unbothered all the time. And indeed, this episode is the show's way of showing off as well. A lot of the series budget went towards this episode, with the aim of creating a flashy adventure that dispels any concerns of this reboot being cheesy or low budget. Now, has the CGI aged brilliantly? No. Does this episode contain zero cheese? No. There were a couple of moments in Rose that were kinda hard to take seriously, mainly the bin eating Mickey. Now, I'm all for a bit of silly humour from time to time. Play that video of the cat falling out the wheelchair and watch me lose my shit 7 years on. The problem was that this silliness kinda contrasted with Clive's dramatic speech about how dangerous the Doctor is, and not in a good way. The End of the World has a few similar moments that it's just really hard to take seriously. This plumber getting dragged into the vents by the tiny robots, like Spencer in that one iCarly episode, comes to mind. The steward just having a button in his office that fucking eviscerates him for no reason also comes to mind. And finally, the magic button to stop all the death is blocked off by a giant, rapidly spinning fan that is right in the fucking way. Why does this space station run on video game logic? Now, all the alien designs are really cool, and all the exaggerations and misconceptions about Earth's history, while not being particularly original, are pretty funny. Then, you've got Cassandra, the last human. Now, Cassandra is confirmed in this episode to be trans. Well, Doctor Who's gone woke again. Pack it up, everyone. Cassandra being trans does kind of contrast with her conservative, fundamentalist attitudes. But to be fair, you do get those kinds of grifters in the real world. Look at Caitlyn Jenner. Her entire personality nowadays is sucking up to a crowd who, to be frank, will take away her human rights and kill her at the first opportunity. So yeah, I wouldn't exactly say Cassandra is good trans representation. I mean, she has a personality and narrative purpose which is more than Rose Noble had. But Cassandra being trans is more of a throwaway joke than anything. Cassandra was made as a commentary of the unrealistic beauty standards forced on female celebrities. Russell T Davies claiming at the time that it was horrifying to see so many of them reduced to sticks. This social commentary is still very relevant now. Like, Ariana, girl, I love you, but what the fuck were they doing to you on the set of Wicked? All the alien stuff is very overwhelming for Rose, and this results in her and the Doctor clashing once again. Her understandably wanting to know what kind of person she's just ran away with, calling out the Doctor's overly mysterious and nonchalant attitude. This results in the Doctor giving Rose the ability to phone her mum, giving her some familiarity to help with the overwhelming alien atmosphere. Again, the Doctor is still quite out of touch with humanity at this point, so this moment of him empathizing and helping Rose out strengthens their bond, and shows how he's remembering to consider the thoughts and feelings of others, helping out where he can. There's also a moment where Jabe comforts the Doctor after finding out he's a Time Lord, and he cries. The Time War really did put the Who back in Doctor Who, and scenes like this show that brilliantly. Not only that, but as far as I know, the Doctor never cried once throughout all of Classic Who. So this moment shows to fans of the classic series that some serious shit clearly happened to the Doctor. I mean, Classic Who was pretty emotionally constipated, and the Doctor being more emotional is just a part of the more melodramatic approach TV had been heading in while the show was off the air. But all the same, it's a very intriguing and impactful moment, especially since the Doctor had kept his emotions tightly bottled up until this point. Another really good scene is Rose talking to this plumber. This scene was actually added in towards the end when the episode underran, and it's a great addition. The Doctor is off gallivanting with the rich and important, while Rose forms a bond with the working class, the ones who get forgotten about, highlighting her ordinariness. It also shows that, despite the Doctor being a working class, salt-of-the-earth Mancunian now, he's still a prestigious alien with knowledge and status. There's also a lot in this episode that I'm surprised they got away with. Stuff like Rose using the word bitchy, or Jabe calling Rose a prostitute. They were clearly set on pushing the boundaries in many ways when it came to this episode, and the Doctor's behaviour towards the end is another example of a risky narrative choice that works really well. The episode ends with him leaving Cassandra to dehydrate and explode, claiming that everything dies eventually. This ties back in with his current feelings of guilt and death, and it really got to him seeing someone so insistent on extending their own life while being so dismissive over the murder of others. Cassandra is clearly a big meaniehead and deserved to be punished, but the Doctor watching her suffer and die is quite cold. And once again, a very bold choice for the behaviour of your heroic protagonist, but a choice that ends up making the Doctor's development across the series all the more noticeable and satisfying. And so, the episode ends with the Doctor and Rose taking in their ordinary surroundings. The Doctor finally opens up to Rose, telling her how his home planet was destroyed in a war, and he's the last of the Time Lords. They've clearly grown to know and trust each other a lot more over the episode, and now he feels ready to confide in her a bit, and to be more honest about his feelings. Rose, however, gets distracted by the smell of chips, and the two of them decide to eat some food. The Doctor has a lot of emotions and trauma to unpack, but for now, he falls back on simple pleasures. thanks to his new ordinary friend reminding him of the joys of humanity and normal life. The Doctor started this episode wanting to escape from his feelings and thoughts, showing off in front of Rose and acting like travelling with him is just a fun adventure. And the episode ends with the Doctor getting the escape he was looking for, he and his new friend enjoying each other's company. The End of the World is a very ambitious episode, and while not everything in it lands perfectly, I think it serves as a pretty good follow-up to the first episode. The Doctor and Rose's dynamic is expanded on really well, the episode's focus on their characters and arcs result in some real standout moments. To be honest, I could see this episode being a bit too much for some people, and could potentially drive new viewers away, but there's a lot to like here. There are some things that haven't aged great, not just the CGI, but I find The End of the World to be a fun episode regardless. For their first trip to the past, the Doctor and Rose go to the past, as they deal with two horrors, ghosts and the Welsh. This episode starts with Rose trying to put into perspective how weird time travel really is, as well as her being considerably more freaked out about going to the past than the future. I think most people would behave like this. It would definitely feel weirder travelling to the past, since it's already happened. There's a level of certainty that travelling to the future doesn't really have. Rose is worried about how interacting with the past might affect the future, but if you think about it, that's what we do in the present, as the Doctor says in Thin Ice.
Every choice I make in this moment could change the whole future.
Exactly like every other day of your life.
So, this episode is about alien ghosts possessing dead people. Not sure why they decided to just film the average day in Cardiff, but sure.
It's Cardiff.
Yeah, mood. I think the zombies do look creepy. There's that uncanny valley feeling that makes them pretty unsettling. But my god, why are their wails so loud? Now, this episode actually has quite a massive impact on the show's lore going forward. It introduces the rift that exists in Cardiff, which was so influential it caused an entire spin-off show. Speaking of which, Eve Miles did such a good job as Gwyneth in this episode that she was invited to be one of the main characters of Torchwood, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, Gwyneth is a really good character in this episode. Once again, Rose makes an effort to get on with her, despite her seeming like some unimportant worker, like in the previous episode, all while the Doctor goes off with Charles Dickens. But Rose and Gwyneth's chat gets really deep, especially considering they were talking about arses just 30 seconds ago. Gwyneth reveals that Rose has been thinking about her dad more than ever recently, and while Rose had just been shocked at the lifestyle of the 1800s, realizes just how mad our world is to someone from that time. Oh yeah, Charles Dickens is in this episode. This episode was the first of what's commonly known as the Celebrity Historical. The episode doesn't revolve around Charles Dickens, but he's still a major part of the story. And also, ghosts at Christmas. No cheeses for us Mises. In this story, Charles Dickens feels old and worn out, feeling as if he's just trudging on with nothing new to look forward to, until this new person arrives and shows him that there's so much more to the world, giving him a new spark of life. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, Dickens dies not long after these events, but surely that isn't a parallel to the Doctor, right? He's not going anywhere anytime soon, right? Eventually, we find out that these ghosts, the Gelth, are looking for a home after their planet was destroyed. In the Time War. The very war the Doctor fought in. We've already seen the fundamentals of how this war has affected him, and this episode goes into what he's willing to do to make amends, so set on saving the Gelth, believing it's the unambiguous right thing to do. His thoughts are clearly overtaken by guilt, but Rose calls him out on his unwavering willingness to help them, no questions asked. Because, yeah, this is a strange and complex moral debate. It makes sense why the Doctor would be so willing to help them. The Time War is still very recent for him, but it also makes sense why Rose finds it wrong. It does seem weird and somewhat disrespectful for these corpses to be puppeted by aliens, and these are the same ghosts that literally tried to kill her earlier. I think it's just natural for humans to find this idea weird, once again largely because of the uncanny valley look of the corpses. So this, again, shows the Doctor's disconnect from humanity. Back when this episode came out, Doctor Who novelist Lawrence Miles criticised it for containing anti-refugee subtext, as the Gelth are asylum seekers who survived the war and are seeking refuge in Britain. While I don't think that was Mark Gatiss' intention when he wrote this episode, I can see how it could be interpreted that way. I think the cheap subversion that the Gelf are secretly evil doesn't do the episode any favours. There's a lot of fear-mongering out there about how all asylum seekers are evil and are taking advantage of the kindness of others, and this narrative very much existed in 2005 as well. So this twist does unfortunately give the episode that subtext, intentional or not. Frankly, I'd never really interpreted it in that way. I only came across this criticism while working on this video. But yeah, take it however you like. Anyway, in a shocking and very unpredictable twist, the Gelf are actually evil.
Now I'm gonna die in a dungeon in Cardiff.
Yeah, mood. But yeah, Charlie Boy defeats the ghosts and Gwyneth blows the place up. Honestly, I think this episode is pretty good. I think the Victorian setting is accurate and eerie. I like the way it expands on established lore and adds a bunch of new important stuff. Almost makes up for the fact that it's set in Cardiff. I need to stop. People are actually going to take these jokes seriously. I don't hate Cardiff or Wales, I promise. I hate the whole of the UK. This leads us into Aliens of London and World War III, the first two-part story of the new series. A lot happens here, so let's climb inside and get to business. So, the Doctor and Rose go back home, but whoopsie-daisy, they accidentally travelled a year into the future. This would be fine if it didn't cause loads of dating contradictions for the rest of RTD's run. The great thing about this, though, is that the episode lingers on it. It properly addresses the very real pain a situation like this would cause. Once again, the show focuses on the domestic, family side of things, something classic Who didn't really do. Oh hey, we've been gone for 2 years, I'm sure this won't have any repercussions on our lives or those around us. Although, that being said, there's also a bit where it's revealed that Jackie started falsely accusing Mickey of murdering Rose, basically ruining his life, and that just never gets brought up again for the rest of the series. Another thing this episode tries to improve from Classic Who is the cliffhanger. Almost every Classic Who story was split into multiple parts, which led to a lot of the cliffhangers being pretty forced. Like, why did he do this? Is he stupid? But this time around, the cliffhanger feels earned, and it ties in all the storylines that are happening simultaneously. This is also the first episode of the revival to fully delve into political commentary, as a flying vehicle crashes into a major landmark building. This attack was done on purpose, so the aliens who owned the spaceship could kill all the important political figures in the country, such as
Chairman of the Parliamentary Commission on the Monitoring of Sugar Standards in Exported Confectionery.
Yeah, he looks like he's committed to his job, so they can claim there are aliens invading, get permission to use nukes, and destroy the planet, weaponizing their close alliance with another country to have an excuse to use nukes.
There's no threat. He just invented it.
Do you think they'll believe him?
What he did last time.
Man, who else misses these good old days when Doctor Who wasn't political? Yeah, you could see this episode as leaning into the conspiracy theory that 9/11 was an inside job. I will not be touching that theory with a 20-foot pole in this video, so just argue it out amongst yourselves in the comments, as I'm sure you were already planning to do. The episode quite clearly has an anti-war message, and is openly critical of the invasion of Iraq from the US and UK, something Russell T Davies would again reference in a future episode.
You can tell the President he's not my boss, and he's certainly not turning this into a war.
The bad guys are the Slitheen, a family business looking to sell pieces of the earth for profit. Since the plot of this episode is quite dark, the Slitheen are made to be more kid-friendly by farting all the time while in their skin suits. Yeah, a lot of people have criticised this, and the Slitheen ended up becoming recurring villains in the CBBC spin-off show The Sarah Jane Adventures, which I definitely think they were better suited for, but I like them here. They've got a reckless, overconfident feel to them, and they're over the top without coming off as pantomime villains. This scientist studying the pig is played by Naoko Mori, who went on to play Toshiko in the spin-off show Torchwood, and it's confirmed in that show that they're the same character. This also makes Owen the only member of the Torchwood team to never meet the Doctor. Life isn't fair. This episode also introduces us to Harriet Jones, a humble MP who mainly exists for comic relief, and she's great. She also has great character development, but we'll come back to that. Anyway, the bad guys are defeated because Mickey can access the Royal Navy and launch a missile at the Houses of Parliament. From his bedroom. Please do not introduce this guy to 4chan. You know, somehow this isn't as bad as the big fans in The End of the World.
Made in Britain.
At the end, the Doctor invites Mickey to travel with him, a stark change from the first episode, showing how their respect for each other has improved a little bit. Mickey still isn't ready to travel yet, but it's a sign of where these characters are headed. So yeah, this two-parter brings the domestic side of the show back in full force, expands on a bunch of the relationships, has the Doctor getting slapped by a mum. What more could you want? I like the Slitheen, they're weird and memorable, and Harriet Jones is the feminine phenomenon we all need right now. Oh man, we are so fucking back. Okay, the episodes so far have been good. But to be honest, there have been some overly camp and goofy moments that I could see alienating people who came into this show hoping for a more hard sci-fi approach. This episode is where it all changes though. Dalek is a fantastic episode, and its impact on New Who cannot be understated. The Daleks are, and always have been, the most iconic Doctor Who villains. They're synonymous with the show, the main reason it became such a hit back in the 60s. A terrifying sci-fi allegory for the World War II bad guys. Look, I'm sorry, I hate having to censor myself like this, I really do, but I like making money. It's easy to forget how powerful of an allegory the Daleks were back in the day. This was a time where, in London at least, you could look out your window and still see rubble left over from the Blitz. The Daleks are a terrifying reminder of what life would be like if fascism were to win. But as the years went by, the horrors of World War II became a distant memory. The group that caused it became nothing more than a punchline, and the Daleks started being taken a lot less seriously, both by the show and the general public. With episode 6 of the revival, though, things changed, as the Daleks were completely revitalized in a way that honors their roots while reinventing them for the modern era. Now, when it was confirmed Doctor Who was coming back, there was no guarantee the Daleks would be able to appear in the show, as the rights to the Daleks are owned by the Terry Nation estate. Terry Nation being the creator of the Daleks. No, I am not calling Terry Nation Davros. So initially, plans were made for a new recurring villain to take their place, called the Toclophane. But luckily, the BBC were able to get the rights to use the Daleks. So, the Doctor and Rose land in an underground bunker filled with alien artifacts, owned by billionaire Henry Van Statten. In my Matt Smith video, I compared Van Statten to Elon Musk. This was before January of 2025, and I would like to issue a formal apology to Henry Van Statten. You are nowhere near as bad. Van Statten is the definition of a nepo baby. He's had everything handed to him on a silver platter all his life, and behaves like a child, tossing things and people aside when they stop being useful or amusing to him. He's so cartoonishly evil and hateable, but there are plenty of people out there exactly like him. There are some that come to mind, I just can't put my finger on it. Oh, and in case you're unsure about Van Statten being a billionaire allegory, he was originally going to be called Will Fences. Will Fences. This show is the worst thing ever, and I love it with all of my heart. There's also Adam, a cute, nerdy British guy who Van Statten instructs to spoon with Rose. Another thing I'm surprised they got away with in this series. Also, yet another character that is kinda tainted due to the behaviour of the actor. But I don't know, I never found Adam to be that interesting or memorable of a character anyway. He's in 2 episodes in this series, and I think there's a comic book where he goes back in time and steals all the Doctor's companions or something? I'm sure there's going to be at least one person in the comments defending that story as peak fiction, and I'm sure you're right. Anyway, the Doctor confronts the Dalek, and I think this scene alone heavily impacted how the Daleks were perceived by the show and the audience for several years. A significant aspect of the Doctor's attitude towards the Daleks for the first 5 series of New Who is his unfettered disdain for them. It makes sense within his character and makes for some fantastic scenes, both in this episode and later on. Matt Smith's performance in Victory of the Daleks being an undeniable highlight. The initial plan here was for the Doctor to just mock the Dalek, but Christopher Eccleston chose to add a lot of anger and pain into his performance, and it adds so much to the episode and the layers of the Doctor's character. This is also where we find out that the Time War was between the Time Lords and the Daleks, and the Doctor was the one to end it all, wiping out both races. This is a big part of the Doctor's character arc in this series, and his overall character across the first 7 series. And this is the episode where that whole aspect of his character is cemented. Christopher Eccleston genuinely gives such a defining performance. The Doctor's guilt and trauma over the Time War translates into unadulterated hatred. The Dalek makes a twisted attempt to relate to the Doctor, commenting on their shared loneliness, saying they're the same deep down. And to be fair, the Doctor has made twisted attempts to relate to others in this series so far. But the Doctor deliberately misconstrues the Dalek's words, deciding to torture it. The Doctor has already been pretty cold throughout this series so far, but this is just another level. He's so consumed by the idea of revenge, and yet he's still so convinced he's nothing like the Dalek. There are times where he's literally foaming at the mouth, begging for the Dalek to kill itself, in this absolutely iconic scene. I know it's been memed to death over the years, but Eccleston's performance here is incredible. All that vitriol for the Dalek to hit back with, "You would make a good Dalek." It's devastating for both sides. The Doctor was so convinced he was above the Dalek morally, genuinely sure anything he did was justified, because it's a Dalek. And the Dalek's only comeback is to compare him to itself. So does that make the Doctor wrong for believing that? But in a way, they are the same. Lost soldiers looking for purpose in a world they don't fit into anymore. But they both find that purpose with Rose. Rose is like the stand-in for new viewers here, the people who are unaware of the history of the Daleks and don't see what warrants all this torture and hatred. Her presence helps the Doctor see sense at the end, realizing what he's turning into, but she also affects the Dalek, her DNA mutating it and changing its thoughts, to the point where it chooses to kill itself rather than feel anything different. It adds a whole new layer to the Daleks without making us sympathize with it or humanizing it. Because at the end of the day, it's still a murderous fascist, and its sheer dedication to do anything but embrace the world around it feels particularly poignant with the way the world's going at the minute. The Daleks' downfall that we see over and over in the RTD era is their refusal to adapt. And the thing that makes the Doctor the better person is his willingness to accept change, to let the people around him influence him positively and help him move forward. That's what stops him from becoming a Dalek. This victory might feel hollow for him in the moment, but it's a big step forward and a great end to the episode. Dalek is a masterpiece. The portrayal of the Dalek is fantastic, giving it a proper fear factor and revitalization we hadn't seen for a long time. The episode takes a lot of things that people struggle to take seriously about the Daleks and fixes them up. You struggle to take the plunger seriously? Now it can kill you. It can't climb stairs? Think again, as this episode features a Dalek flying up a flight of stairs for the first time. Okay, no, this wasn't the first time the Daleks flew, I just felt like pissing off some classic Who fans. The Dalek in this episode is portrayed as really powerful and clever, and it's a fantastic return to form for them. This episode really had a huge impact on the future of the show, largely due to the writing, but Christopher Eccleston's portrayal as the Doctor in this episode was also incredibly powerful and influential. He really poured his heart into this episode, as he was battling anorexia and dealing with the loss of his dad at the time of filming. What a guy, honestly. In classic Doctor Who fashion, this incredible, iconic episode is immediately followed by mid. Okay, this episode is alright, but I definitely consider it the weakest of the series. And I mean, in all fairness, if the long game is the worst your series has to offer, that's a pretty good series. Yeah, this episode is basically just set up for the series finale. There's some good political commentary here on the manipulation of the media.
Create a climate of fear, and it's easy to keep the borders closed. The right word in the right broadcast repeated often enough can destabilize an economy, invent an enemy, change a vote.
No, guys, you don't get it. The political commentary was just more subtle in the earlier series. It wasn't in your face at all. But yeah, good to see GB News is still going strong 200,000 years later. Oh yeah, Simon Pegg is here, and he's alright. Can't help but feel like he's a bit wasted in this episode. He brings a good sense of wittiness and awkwardness to his character, and he's still one of the best things about the episode. Adam from the last episode is also here. I mean, he does have a narrative purpose, being that he behaves irresponsibly to show why the Doctor continues travelling with Rose despite their clashes, something which features prominently in the next episode. Jackie from Friday Night Dinner is here. Yeah, there's not a lot to talk about here, to be honest. I'm sure I'll come back to this episode in the finale, but for now, Father's Day is the first and only Doctor Who episode to canonically rickroll the audience. This episode is a very character-driven one, and one that tackles the effects of stupid and one that tackles the effects of time travel in a way the show hadn't really done before. This is an episode I've grown to appreciate a lot more as I've got older. There's a great mix of the domestic character drama of the RTD era with all the sci-fi time travel stuff that makes this episode really unique and underrated in my opinion. Rose's dad died when she was a baby, and having been fed all these stories by her mum about how great he was, she wants to meet him. So the Doctor, being the show-off he is, takes her to the moment he died, claiming he can do anything. This episode sees the introduction of the Reapers, parasites who take advantage of weak moments in time and eat people. They're creepy, their tails looking like scythes is a really cool touch, and they literally fucking eat the Doctor. Yeah, the Doctor just fucking dies here. No dramatic build-up, no orchestral crescendo, he just dies. I genuinely think this moment altered my brain chemistry as a kid. It's just like, oh shit, he's dead. Which I think perfectly summarizes the look on Rose's face here. It just feels so random and wrong, but in all the right ways. Rose really pushes the limits of traveling with the Doctor in this episode, and is quite immature and entitled. To be honest, one of the main reasons I don't really like Rose in Series 2 is her overconfidence and entitlement, and you can see elements of that characterization in this episode, though I find it a lot more palatable here. Her belief that she can do anything while traveling with the Doctor and not face any repercussions is kinda his fault. The Doctor keeps bigging himself up to her, giving her this impression that he's some infallible, untouchable god. And this actually ties into a major theme of this episode and Rose's progression as a character. Rose lives in this fantasy world, a mentality that's only worsened since traveling with the Doctor. But this episode grounds her back in reality in several ways. This episode, at its core, is ordinary and relatable. The Doctor and Rose even acknowledge the ordinariness of this episode's setting. This series so far has been full of bitchy trampolines in the year 5 billion, or green farting aliens in Downing Street, or Audrey II manipulating the news on a space station. But this is just a day in 1987. Rose was repeatedly told by her mum how amazing her dad was. She has this romanticized idea in her head of how happy her parents were, and how this perfect childhood was ripped away from her. But then she sees her mum and dad interact for the first time after he should have died, and their marriage is in shambles. Jackie is calling him all sorts of names, stupid and a failure, and even insinuating he's a cheater. Pete then pauses to explain what she's talking about, which, if I'm honest, does feel a little forced and kinda takes me out of the scene. But all the same, Jackie almost fantasizes about the idea of divorcing him, or even the idea of him dying. It's that experience we can all relate to of not knowing what we have until it's gone, taking the things and people in our lives for granted. Jackie and Pete's marriage is definitely very flawed, but they do still care about each other underneath it all. It makes sense for Jackie to glamorize her relationship with Pete and to miss him now that he's not around anymore. Rose always thought of her dad as this genius entrepreneur inventor who was going to change the world. But in reality, he was a Del boy. A guy with big ideas who's struggling to achieve the success he dreams of and is scraping by. It's endearing in a way. There's even that moment where Rose starts imagining the childhood she never had with her dad, making up all these things she wished they got to do, before he says,
"That's not me."
Again, this episode is all about Rose's fantasy world collapsing. Her dad wasn't this amazing genius with the perfect marriage, and the Doctor isn't this infallible god. And these adventures aren't just an escape from reality, they have real consequences. Like I said, I think this episode improves with time, and I've come to appreciate it a lot more as I've gotten older. It's the kind of emotional, character-driven narrative that I love from this show, mixed in with some cool sci-fi concepts, and it's a real standout from this series. Which is saying something. Speaking of standout episodes, The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances are, frankly, a cracking pair of episodes. These were the first of many episodes to be written by Stephen Moffat. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you've probably worked this out already, but I am a bit of a Moffat fan. His work on the show isn't flawless, obviously, but his interpretation of the Doctor as a character is one I strongly resonate with, and his balance between wittiness and emotionally mature dialogue and storylines just defines the revival of Doctor Who, in my opinion. The three Doctors who Moffat has guest written for all tend to cite his episodes as some of their favourites to work on, and that includes Christopher Eccleston, who called this two-parter his favourite. And it's easy to see why with this opening scene, as we're immediately flung into action, the Doctor immediately showing that blend of awkwardness and confidence that Moffat uses all the time. The way this episode establishes its time period is actually quite unique, and sets up the competition between the Doctor and Jack. Normally, the Doctor would just use the TARDIS, scan the area and find the date and where the spaceship crashed, but he chooses to ask around. Rose criticises him for this, but the Ninth Doctor is getting to the point where he's starting to properly enjoy travelling again and interacting with others, and we continue to see that when he finds a place full of people. He finds a jazz band performing in a bar, and rather than interrupt the show, he waits until the singer is done before barging on stage. It's a small thing, but it shows how the Ninth Doctor enjoys the simple things, and taking the time to stop and enjoy a performance out of respect and appreciation is something I can't see every other Doctor choosing to do. The Doctor asks if anything has fallen from the sky recently, and the crowd laughs. Then we hear the air raid siren, and we see the World War II poster, and it makes sense. It's actually quite funny, especially on rewatch, but again establishes the Doctor's old-fashioned way of going about things, and the clash that creates with Jack later on in the story. There's also some of that classic Stephen Moffat meta-commentary, starting with the Doctor mentioning how no one follows the don't wander off rule, which is then followed by the TARDIS phone ringing, the Doctor acknowledging that it isn't a real phone. As far as I know, the TARDIS phone was never really used or acknowledged at all in Classic Who, so it's a good moment of self-awareness from the show, while also making it clear that there's something really strange and powerful at play here, contrasting with the phone call being from a child. Also, I'm sure there's some elitist Classic Who fanboy going off on me in the comments as we speak because I didn't know about that scene in The Monster of Deadly Doom Part 12 where the Doctor uses the TARDIS phone. And yeah, you're right, I'm a fake fan, I only watch the show because David Tennant is hot, you got me. Speaking of characters who find David Tennant hot, God, I'm so good at transitions. It's in this episode we're introduced to Captain Jack Harkness, the suave time agent from the 51st century. He's also quite openly pansexual and will flirt with anyone, regardless of gender or species. Also, there are a surprising amount of boy kisses in this episode, and I find that very funny.
So, Ben, there's a time and a place.
But you got an excellent bottom, too.
Half this street thinks your missus must be messing about with Mr. Averstock, the butcher, but she's not. You are.
I've gotten to know Algie quite well since I've been in town. You're not his type.
Jack ended up becoming such a fan-favourite character that he was given his own spin-off show, Torchwood. One of his first lines in the entire show is him claiming to have been pregnant in the past. Despite this, and his open-mindedness to everyone, he is confirmed in episode 7 to be transphobic, which... yeah. Jack is awesome here, though. I'm gonna be completely honest, I think 9 and Jack had better chemistry than 10 and Jack ever did. Which is strange, because given what we know about Barrowman's on-set antics and Eccleston's issues with unprofessionalism, I highly doubt they got along off camera. I will forever appreciate Christopher Eccleston for going through the nightmare that was filming this series, just so we could have some doomed yowie. There's a sort of love triangle that develops here, the Doctor and Jack fighting over Rose, before realising they were obviously meant to be together. Is anyone else a fan of the musical falsettos? Listen to the song The Thrill of First Love, it's so Doctor and Jack coded. Jack is Whizzer and the Doctor is Marvin, obviously. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, scary gas mask zombie episode. The Empty Child is such a good villain. Like, how do you come up with something like this? I honestly think it's safe to say this story had a massive impact on how the modern era of Doctor Who portrays its villains. This was the first monster to really have a catchphrase, outside of the Daleks and arguably the Master. And I guess Cassandra? It could come off as cheap or gimmicky, but it doesn't. It makes The Empty Child all the more memorable and started a whole wave of villains having catchphrases. The Vashta Narada, the Handbots, I'm counting Don't Blink as a catchphrase because duh. Even the Cybermen were given a couple of recurring motifs. It's a trend that sort of died out towards the end of the 11th Doctor era, but has made a comeback more recently with the Not Things and Mr. Ring-a-Ding. It is slightly cheesy when you think about it, but that's Doctor Who to a T. The Empty Child was also the first villain of the revival to just fully lean into the horror aspect, to bring back the classic Doctor Who trope of terrifying kids. The phrase hiding behind the sofa was commonly associated with the show back in the 60s and 70s, and is something I've never really got, mainly because my sofa has always been up against the wall. Do people really just plonk their sofa in the middle of the living room? If you do that, please let me know. I don't think I've ever met your kind before. Anyway, I've watched plenty of classic Who over the years, and it's honestly hard for me to be scared by the alien costumes a lot of the time. I know standards were lower back then, and there were some moments that kinda freaked me out, mainly in the 6th Doctor era. Attack of the Cybermen gets surprisingly gory, Revelation of the Daleks is unsettling, and Shockeye from the 2 Doctors kinda gives me the creeps. But yeah, the Empty Child transformation scene was iconic and revolutionary, really making use of the new budget and technology to create a haunting visual that holds up incredibly well today. It sounds kinda weird to say this, but the gas mask zombies are another example of Series 1's relatable feel. World War II is a common topic of interest among children, and back when this episode aired, at least, there's a good chance those kids would have grandparents who lived through the war. That and the villain being a child adds a level of personal connection. Early plans involved the zombies being able to levitate, but they're kept pretty basic, which was definitely the right call. They do have super strength, which is kinda pushing it, but I can accept it.
You got the moves? Show me your moves.
Rosa, I'm trying to resonate concrete.
We stan an asexual king. The ending to the Doctor dances is so iconic too. For the first time in a while, nobody dies, and it's such a crucial moment to the 9th Doctor's development over the series. He's been surrounded by grief and death for so long, wandering aimlessly, looking for a purpose, and he finally finds it. It's an amazing moment of the 9th Doctor, and another example of Moffat truly getting the character. Death not feeling proper or final was a common critique of Moffat's Doctor Who scripts back in the day, and I can see where those people were coming from, but come on, how can you not love this moment? The Doctor's smile is genuinely so contagious. Just this once, everybody lives, and it's yet another absolute highlight from Series 1. And so, we see the beginning of an absolutely iconic TARDIS team. The pansexual, the asexual, and their pet bi-curious ally. The Empty Child and the Doctor dances are 2 fantastic episodes. They're creepy, they're emotionally impactful, they were very influential on New Who as a whole, and they're always great to go back and rewatch. Boomtown. An episode that tends to get overlooked, and I can sorta see why. I mean, it is sandwiched between 2 phenomenal stories, and on the surface, it does seem like a bit of an outlier among the emotionally mature second half of the series. But underneath the farting aliens and incredibly unsubtle yaoi, you've got a surprisingly deep and philosophical narrative that also focuses on the characters in a meaningful way. Okay, first of all, in terms of the dynamic of the main cast, this episode is genuinely one of my favourites of the entire show. These 4 make such a great team, their chemistry is so good. Back in Aliens of London, the Doctor said to Rose,
"Don't you dare make this place domestic."
But looking at this team dynamic, I think it's safe to say he's loosened up a bit since then. Another sign of Nine's character development.
Buy me a drink first.
It's such hard work.
But worth it.
Oh my god, just make out already, you fucking cowards. This episode takes the time to focus on how Rose and Mickey's relationship has deteriorated since she shot... What was that? This episode takes the time to focus on how Rose and Mickey's relationship has deteriorated since she started traveling with the Doctor. Cause yeah, this stuff has had a big effect on his life too. His girlfriend ran off with a stranger, and he spent a year ostracized from his community because they all believed he's a murderer. Which is something I'm surprised doesn't get brought up here. Mickey tries to move on with his life, desperately trying to fill the void of Rose's absence, but he can't help but come running whenever she turns up. Again, the focus is put on how life in the TARDIS affects the people still living their ordinary lives, something Classic Who never really explored.
Sorry, awaiting orders, sir.
Right, here's the plan. Like you said, nice plan. Anything else?
Oh my god, just make out already, you fucking cowards! This episode brings back Margaret the Slitheen, the only survivor of the destruction of Downing Street. She's now Mayor of Cardiff. If this episode happened nowadays, she'd probably have her own segment on GB News instead, where she talks about how the woke left blew up Parliament to try and silence her. Leave the mayor alone! Oh my god, just make out already. Oh wait, no, sorry, wrong person. The main topic this episode tackles is justice, and whether people can truly change for the better. Margaret is to be taken back to Raxacuricafalabatorius, where she'll face the death penalty. And so the question is posed. Does she deserve that punishment? And is it right of the Doctor and his friends to make that decision? Do the travelers in the police box get to decide who deserves to live and die? It's a surprisingly mature follow-up to an adventure where farting aliens committed a budget version of 9/11. Margaret keeps insisting that she is changing and fighting against her instincts, and it's true. Earlier in the episode, she was about to kill a journalist who wanted to report on the dangers of her nuclear power station, but stopped when she learned the journalist was getting married with a baby on the way. She's potentially sabotaged her own plans here, but she briefly forgot her instinct to kill. While having dinner with the Doctor, she mentions that she felt an urge to kill a child earlier that day as well, but decided not to. Are these just one-off acts of kindness to justify her previous behavior to herself, or is she genuinely turning a corner? And is it worth taking the risk of finding out? Since she was trained to kill by her family from a young age, it's essentially a case of nature versus nurture, a classic philosophical debate. Basically, is bad behavior inherited or acquired? Was Margaret always destined to be a killer, or could she change in the right environment? And more importantly, would she want to? Frankly, it is very easy for toxic ideas and mentalities to become disgustingly normalized in your mind, especially at a young age. And it's hard to see the problems with your behavior while you're in that dark place. It's only once you're out of it, you can look back and think, how the fuck did I live like that for so long? It's all well and good blaming your past on your behavior, but you have to really want to do better in order to make a change. This is also a really poignant scenario to put the Ninth Doctor in at this point in the series. He's grown a lot over these adventures, slowly getting back in touch with his humanity and learning that life isn't just an endless slog of pain and death. He did unspeakable things during the Time War, things which haunt him in unimaginable ways, but he's had the opportunity to grow and do better over this series. Why should he deny someone else the opportunity? And you can see this growth affecting his behavior. If this episode had happened at the beginning of the series, he would have definitely just taken Margaret to her death, no remorse. But he actually listens to what she has to say and thinks about his decision. He doesn't forget her past of merciless slaughter and plans for genocide, but he is definitely more mellowed than he would have been previously. But he does acknowledge that she's begging for mercy through the disguise of a corpse she murdered and has spent the last 6 months puppeteering. This moment made me realize I've been referring to her as Margaret for simplicity, but this isn't Margaret. This is Blonfell Foch, the Slitheen, who killed the real Margaret, and is using her harmless exterior to beg for her life. Because, if we're being honest, it would be harder to sympathize with her if she wasn't wearing this disguise. Anyway, then it turns out Margaret is still evil after all, and yeah, I think this is the weakest part of the episode. I get it, we still have a plot to get done, and we need a dramatic ending, but I do feel like it somewhat undermines the nuance of the Doctor and Margaret's earlier debate. Margaret is defeated when the heart of the TARDIS suddenly opens up. Yeah, this literally just exists as setup for the series finale, but it does create a decent conclusion to the narrative. Margaret regresses to an egg and has the chance to start over. We never know what happens to her, and that's good, because there is no definitive answer to this debate. It depends on multiple different factors. Maybe the Doctor will take her to a family who'll fuck her up in a whole new way. Maybe the Slitheen bloodline is just genetically predisposed to evil. Who knows? But the Doctor knows anyone can change, and he's willing to take that chance. So yeah, Boomtown is a surprisingly deep and impactful episode that has plenty of light-hearted moments that mix in well, and it's an episode that I think is quite overlooked. Oh man, the Series 1 finale. I love this finale so much, man. I don't think anything could top the Series 10 finale for me, but damn, this one comes close. All the themes and arcs conclude in an incredibly satisfying way that ends up solidifying Series 1 as a pretty perfect example of how to write a series of television. So, the Doctor, Rose, and Jack all wake up in futuristic versions of different game shows. The Doctor is in Big Brother, Rose is in The Weakest Link, and Jack is in What Not to Wear. If this episode was made nowadays, Jack would absolutely be in Naked Attraction, I Don't Make the Rules. Things seem ordinary at first. I mean, the games are a little different, but it's 200,000 years in the future. That's to be expected. But then... it's still better than the modern weakest link, Series 1 has covered relevant topics in previous episodes. The End of the World touched on Hollywood's unrealistic feminine beauty standards, and The Long Game discussed the manipulation of the media. Bad Wolf contains commentary on the rise of reality TV in the 2000s, with these shows that basically thrive on exploitation of the working class. I think the social commentary in the other two episodes I mentioned is still pretty relevant now, but I think Bad Wolf's message has only become more accurate over time. What was once an art form to educate and entertain has now become an automated, soulless machine, overstuffed with repetitive content of no value, existing just to give the people stuck at home the brief dopamine hit of watching someone go through hell for our entertainment, and all we can think is, glad that's not me. Like all the people on social media who relish in the downfall of a celebrity or content creator they don't like. It was topical at the time and has aged incredibly well in the age of social media. Right, I'm sure many people will agree with me when I say Christopher Eccleston is quite an underappreciated Doctor. David Tennant gets all the praise for making the show as big as it is, and he is awesome. But I really don't think Eccleston gets enough credit for his portrayal as the Doctor. He was, dare I say, fantastic, and I think the series finale is his absolute standout performance. He was great in Dalek too, but oh man, he just exudes aura in this adventure, and he really gave it his all. The Series 1 finale remains one of my favourite portrayals of the Doctor ever, and Christopher Eccleston is such a big part of that. The Doctor has this conversation with Linda that sort of mirrors Rose's conversation with her dad back in Father's Day. Rose made up this ideal scenario with this person she never really knew, and the Doctor has to provide reassurance to this person he doesn't really know. Both Pete and Linda are anomalies, neither are meant to be where they are now, and only are because of the very person trying to comfort them. It's definitely an unintentional connection, but it's something cool I just noticed and wanted to mention. Eventually, the Doctor escapes the Big Brother house with the power of plot armor. And once again, he has insane aura here.
Linda, you're sweet. From what I've seen of your world, do you think anybody votes for sweet?
The Ninth Doctor is a lot more pragmatic than other Doctors. He's not afraid to acknowledge the real world for what it is. To be honest, something that happens a lot in the David Tennant era that I find a bit weird is the Doctor's endless glazing of humans. Like we're incredible, unstoppable pioneers who can do no wrong. The Ninth Doctor acknowledges humanity's careless side here though. He knows that sometimes people can be dicks. And he wants to do his best to not be a dick, and to save Linda, knowing she doesn't stand a chance in this slaughterhouse. It's also, once again, accurate commentary on how we as humans really can be sheep. We never look to the sweet, quiet person. We always focus on whoever shouts the loudest. There's also this scene where the Doctor realizes that he created this dystopian Earth by getting involved in the events of the Long Game. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it feels like this scene doesn't carry the weight I think it was intended to. This plot point has basically no impact on the story itself and is never brought up again. And it is a recurring theme over the first 10 series of New Who that the Doctor isn't perfect, and that they can do more harm than good at times. But I feel like this was kind of a superficial use of that narrative, and it's my one real critique with the episode. Anyway, Captain Jack escapes in a scene that was definitely someone's bisexual awakening, and he reunites with the Doctor. This scene is so fucking good. The way it builds up, the overlapping of shouting, the way the Doctor just misses Rose, the way the diegetic noise gets drowned out as the Doctor completely dissociates, it's brilliantly done. And then we slowly build up to the reveal of the Daleks, and it's so good. Even if they were spoiled in the Next Time trailer at the end of Boomtown, for some reason, I still don't know why they thought that was a good idea. I know I keep saying this, but I just have to talk about how good Christopher Eccleston is in this finale. And his performance at the end of this episode is amazing. From the moment the Daleks show up, his body language communicates so much. When he first sees them, he shrugs his shoulders back as if he's preparing for actual combat. He tries to be jokey and unbothered, but even the sound of the Daleks is enough to completely remove that facade. Towards the end, his confidence soars, the number one enemy of the Daleks not willing to let his guard down for a second. He knows exactly how to get to them, how to bypass their robotic nature and strike fear into their hearts, to remind them that he destroyed them all in the blink of an eye and he'll fucking do it again. The Daleks are so shook that they immediately forget about Rose, and we see how many there truly are, knowing firsthand how impossible it was to even stop one of them. It's such an iconic cliffhanger that still has me hooked no matter how many times I rewatch it. Bad Wolf is an awesome episode. It serves as perfect setup for the finale while still telling an investing and layered story on its own, with great characters, commentary that I think has aged really well, and a magnificent performance from the lead actor. It's an iconic, top-tier episode of Doctor Who.
And if you want to remember me, then you can do one thing. That's all. One thing. Have a good life. Do that for me, Rose. Have a fantastic life.
The Parting of the Ways is a fantastic culmination of Series 1, and holds up as one of my favourite episodes of the entire show. The series wraps up with an emotional, cohesive, and impactful finale that guaranteed Doctor Who's success for years to come. This episode flings us straight into action, the TARDIS making its way to the Dalek ships. You've got the compulsory shot of the TARDIS getting destroyed as promotional clickbait for the Next Time trailer. You've also got the Dalek and the TARDIS. It's such an action-packed opening. Something becomes clear with this scene. The Ninth Doctor is tired, and from the off, he feels defeated and knows his chances of victory are next to none. He really thought the Daleks were gone, that the Time War was over. He was on his way to healing and enjoying life again, and this revelation has just knocked him all the way back down again. He tries to maintain a confident exterior, but he's broken. Healing is a delicate process. It's incredibly easy for one tiny thing to undo years of progress and send you spiraling, and that reality is portrayed brilliantly with the Doctor's attitude in this finale. I do love a good healing narrative, especially when it's done realistically with ups and downs. Missy in Series 10 is another great example of this kind of thing. The Ninth Doctor's journey is brought to life amazingly by Christopher Eccleston, and it's honestly hard to believe this narrative was written by the same guy who was like, yep, the Doctor is fully healed now. It happened in the future, but also right now, but also fuck knows. It happens, trust me bro. The characterization of the Daleks in this episode is really interesting, and I think this is their best outing of the RTD era. Actually, probably all of New Who. The Emperor of the Daleks has established himself as a religious figure, and the Daleks have become a religious cult of sorts. Yeah, this goes against what the Daleks were originally about, but that's the point, and I think it works really well and provides a whole new layer of depth for the villains. These Daleks are half human, made out of the losers at the game station and the unwanted people in society. This goes against the fundamental ideology of the Daleks, their obsession with purity. We saw back in episode 6 how the last Dalek in the universe would rather kill itself than become contaminated with human DNA. But these Daleks have chosen to live in a state of constant self-hatred, and it drives them insane. It's no wonder they turn to religion. It's their way of trying to justify their own existence. It's very common for bad people to turn to religion after being exposed for their behavior, or to use religion as justification for their actions. We're seeing this happen in America as we speak. A government of extremist Christians weaponizing and deliberately misconstruing the peaceful message of Christianity while the country devolves into fascism, all under the guise of traditional Christian values. Or Israel weaponizing Judaism while they commit genocide on Palestine. There are extremists in every religion, but this Dalek Empire is built entirely on self-loathing and refusal to accept change, and that's where these Daleks differ from the Doctor. The Doctor did bad things during the Time War, but he wanted to do better, and so he did. He worked on himself, took opportunities around him, valued the people in his life who cared about him, and it worked. The Daleks want to put on a facade of change to try and justify their own existence, when they're still the same old evil, just with a new coat of paint. The Daleks going against their roots of purity is a recurring theme in the RTD era, and it highlights the inherent hypocrisy and asininity of their mindset.
I was much better off as a coward.
Yes! Fuck yes! Doomed Yowie! Woo! Isn't it funny how the two best series finales both respectively contain Doomed Yowie and Yuri? Makes you think. Actually, the Series 9 finale is basically tied with Series 1 as my second favourite, and the Doctor and Clara's relationship is so Doomed Yuri. Like, I know the 12th Doctor looks like a 60-year-old man, but this is the kind of yearning you can only get from Yuri, let's be real. Anyway, let's take a break from Doomed Yowie to go back to this boring, meaningless analysis. The Doctor and Rose have built up a strong bond over this series, and both know they made the right choice in sticking together. The Doctor acknowledges this. He says that they could just walk away from everything, nothing is stopping them, and that Rose could just ask to do that. The Doctor has established that he's fully willing to bend the rules for her, and she could very easily take advantage of that trust, but she doesn't. This also opens up some questions about the Doctor, and whether he feels ready to take on the Dalek fleet. When Rose says he would never run away from the conflict, he agrees, but you have to wonder, would he have considered it had she asked? Is the Doctor pulling a bit of a Schrodinger's cat here, not properly deciding what to do until Rose makes the decision for him? It shows this almost reliance they've developed on each other, and what happens next solidifies that reliance goes both ways. The Doctor looks defeated, but immediately springs into action, convincing Rose he has a whole new plan. Rose is the audience surrogate here, and with the hopeful music playing, we believe the Doctor has a plan for a second. But then, he sends her home, getting rid of his TARDIS in the process. He knows this is a fight he can't win, and he chooses to save her life, knowing she would stick with him until they both die. This scene is genuinely a masterclass in character writing. It's brilliant on its own, but due to the strong characterization the Doctor and Rose have received over the series, it contains a whole layer of emotional depth and weight that wouldn't have been there without the strong character drama throughout the series. The Doctor has a pre-recorded hologram to explain to Rose what he's doing and why. He opens his monologue with this:
I'm dead or about to die any second with no chance of escape.
Which fits the Ninth Doctor's pragmatic, no-nonsense way of going about things. He doesn't try and be all melodramatic, he doesn't dance around the subject, he tells it like it is. He's about to die, which he accepts, and tops it off with a sarcastic line that shows his general apathy to this kind of thing at this point in his life.
And that's okay, hope it's a good death.
Rose complains, and the Doctor fully clocks her without even being in the room. It's another simple thing that seems generic on the surface, but highlights so much about these characters and their relationship. The Doctor knows Rose well enough to accurately predict how she's reacting to this news, because they've got to know each other really well over the series. The Doctor says that she should just leave the TARDIS, let it become a reminder of what used to be as the world moves on. This is what happened to the show back in the 80s. It got cancelled, the Doctor was taken by a fight he couldn't win, and left the world, who moved on with their lives. The imagery of the TARDIS became a strange relic of a bygone age. There was also no guarantee that this series would be a success, or if Doctor Who would carry on after this finale. So this also serves as a metaphor for this revival of the show, if it did get cancelled. Just a strange little thing, gathering dust over time. But there are absolutely some people out there who it meant so much to. This is some striking meta-commentary that gets expanded on later in the episode. The Doctor leaves Rose with one instruction as the compression in his voice disappears.
Have a good life. Do that for me, Rose. Have a fantastic life.
And oh my god, I am a mess. This scene is so well written, but it shines even more because the Doctor and Rose have developed a clear bond over the series. They've grown and developed as characters, and now it's all been taken. Whenever I introduce people to Doctor Who, I judge them heavily based on how they react to this scene. If, like me, they cry like a bitch, I know they're gonna love this show. This scene is also just really good at summarizing what you need to hear after losing someone important to you, and it's a scene I always come back to when I'm missing someone who isn't in my life anymore. There was a YouTuber you may have heard of called Technoblade, and from the age of 12 to 17, I idolized him. From 2017 to 2022, I watched every video and stream he did, and I mean every single one. I spent years completely copying his humor, his speech patterns, his mannerisms. I so badly wanted to be like him. Even now, I'll catch myself saying or doing certain things, and I think to myself, that's Technoblade right there. He had a massive influence on me as I grew up. In 2022, he passed away from cancer, and it fucking sucked. When I woke up and saw the news, one of the first things I did was watch this scene, and it did help put things into perspective, and gave me the words of reassurance and encouragement I really needed to hear. Russell T Davies is not a perfect writer, but God, when he puts his mind to it, he writes absolutely timeless gold. And I think this scene remains one of the best things he's ever written, at least for Doctor Who, and it remains one of my favourite scenes of the entire show. It's at this point we find out what the Doctor is fighting for. He can wipe out all the Daleks, finally killing them for good, at the cost of wiping out all life on Earth. He can kill all the Daleks, but in the process, wipe out a whole other race. A race that he holds dearly in his heart. Sound familiar? Like I said earlier, all that healing the Doctor has done over the series is being completely unravelled, as he's trapped in essentially the exact same position he was in at the end of the Time War.
Have you tried that new pizza place on Minto Road?
What's it selling?
Pizza.
Oh, that's nice.
I've lost count of how many times I've had this exact conversation with family, and that's the point here. Rose is back in her regular life, stuck listening to inane conversations that sound right out of the royal family. But she knows there's more to life than eating chips and watching TV. The Doctor showed her, and us, that you've got to try. You've got to make a stand. Even though he's 200,000 years in the future, that fight is happening now, in a weird way. This plot point was sort of foreshadowed in The End of the World, when Rose rang her mum, despite being 5 billion years in the future.
200,000 years, it's way off.
That fight is happening right now.
That line really puts things into perspective. How you can still shape the future from where you are right now, whereas Jackie lacks that initiative and would rather take things as they come. Mickey, on the other hand, doesn't have the same motivation as Rose yet, but has had glimpses of life with the Doctor and knows how much that life means to her.
Because there's nothing left for me here.
Nothing?
No.
If that's what you think, let's get this thing open.
She's honestly pretty selfish in this scene, straight up admitting she doesn't care about Mickey anymore and doesn't see him as a valuable part of her life. Obviously, she's blinded by desperation to save the Doctor, but it's still a surprisingly harsh moment from her. And Mickey, even though his life and relationship were ruined by the Doctor, chooses to help Rose anyway, because she still means that much to him, just as the Doctor means so much to her. What a nice young lad. I sure am glad Noel Clarke is this selfless and kind in real life. The events of Father's Day also come back here, as Rose tells Jackie how she got to meet her dad. It's a great way of tying everything together for the finale, adding to the cohesion of Series 1. But, like the Doctor, Pete was also an eccentric guy full of mad ideas, trying to go against the way the world wants him to be. And he clearly influenced Jackie in the same way the Doctor influenced Rose. Jackie let that spark fade from her life after Pete died, and doesn't want the same thing to happen to Rose. Like I said earlier, this whole part of the episode serves as an allegory for Doctor Who's original cancellation in the 80s, and Rose's actions represent the desire to bring the show back. RTD, like Rose, wanted to save the Doctor. He was told it was a waste of time, but the Doctor taught him growing up that you should keep trying, even when everyone else walks away. So, he took a gamble, a shot in the dark to bring the show back, no guarantee if it would work out. And thankfully, it did. But even if this series was a failure, it would have been better than if they hadn't tried at all. Again, I love the way the Daleks are portrayed in this episode, and their invasion of the game station is another great scene. Their ruthless nature is conveyed really well, how they choose to go down to Floor Zero and massacre everyone just because they can. And that scene where they kill Linda is just chilling. You can't hear what the Dalek is saying, but you just know, and it's so eerie. There are even some kind of funny moments mixed in, like the Daleks getting zapped by the android. It's a silly moment that doesn't take away from the threat the Daleks pose. Jack knows he's just there to hold off the Daleks for as long as possible to buy the Doctor time, and gets other people to fight with him, lying to them and telling them they can win. It's a bit of a moral grey area. Obviously, it was wrong to lie to them and give them false hope, but they were gonna die anyway. A similar thing was discussed in Series 8's Flatline, where Clara has to behave like the Doctor and gives the people around her false hope, because telling them they're just gonna die will make them give up. Is this just the influence the Doctor has? Getting others to sacrifice their lives in his name?
You gotta die sometime.
And so, the Doctor is faced with the decision. Can he commit double genocide once again? And he refuses. A clear and satisfying conclusion to the Ninth Doctor's character arc. He is then bailed out of this decision by God. Okay, yeah, this is essentially a Deus Ex Machina. The series finales of RTD1 do get a lot of flack for their endings, often being called cheap and unsatisfying. And I get why people think that. But I think the reason these finales work is because they have build-up, they have backstory, and they have consequence. Yes, Rose suddenly becoming a god does seem random and cheap on the surface, but the whole episode has been building to this moment. And not just the episode, but the series as a whole. We've spent 13 episodes getting to know the Doctor and Rose, seeing their friendship develop, and seeing them change and grow as people. Rose has grown in confidence and been inspired by the Doctor, and chose to risk her life in his name. This ending is also the culmination of several plot points over various episodes. Jackie's decision to help Rose comes after the events of Father's Day. Mickey's decision to help Rose comes after the relationship conflict they experienced in the Slitheen trilogy. And the heart of the TARDIS had also been established, albeit quite suddenly, in Boomtown. And most importantly, this ending still has consequences for the Doctor. Yes, he got bailed out of his decision by literal godlike circumstances, but he still ends up giving his own life to save Rose. The Ninth Doctor still dies here, but it's a satisfying ending for him. His arc is done. He's confident he made the right decision, and still ended up giving his life to save an ordinary human, because that's who the Doctor is. He accepts his fate, and has taken his first proper step to overcoming the guilt and trauma of the Time War. There's also the bad wolf stuff, these words that have been following the Doctor and Rose everywhere. It turns out the words themselves don't have any actual meaning, it's just a bootstrap paradox to get Rose to save the Doctor. Yeah, this moment is just kind of a, oh, sure, I guess. Oh yeah, also Jack is alive again. Screw everyone else though, am I right, Rose?
What more can I say? How am I to face tomorrow? Have to be screwed out of today.
Man, I really want to make a video about falsettos now. To the one person watching who gets these references, should I make a falsettos video? Let me know. Now, I feel like we're all kinda used to regenerations being this big event, with bombastic music, a heart-wrenching speech, just a huge, impactful moment to give a send-off to an incarnation of the Doctor who will have inspired millions. The Ninth Doctor's regeneration isn't like this at all. But it's still a great ending to the character, and honestly a pretty perfect way of introducing regeneration to the audience. The Ninth Doctor finally overcomes his constant sense of self-loathing, and accepts that he truly was fantastic. It seems like RTD views regeneration as a complete change of character, that every Doctor is fundamentally a different person, and that the previous incarnation dies. If I'm being honest, I'm not really a fan of that portrayal. I much prefer the same software, different case message that Moffat went for. RTD's perception of regeneration is definitely present in this scene, but it's not a major part of it, so it is something I can look past. It does become a lot more prevalent in the end of time, which we will come back to at a later date. So, the Ninth Doctor regenerates, and if you look closely here, you'll spot the 14th Doctor making a brief cameo. What a cool little Easter egg, and with that, Series 1 is over. I mean, there is the Christmas invasion, but that's a story for later this year, probably.
I'm the Doctor, by the way. What's your name?
Rose.
Nice to meet you, Rose. Run for your life.
I can feel it. Turn of the earth. I'm a Time Lord. I'm the last of the Time Lords.
I'm dead or about to die any second with no chance of escape.
I watched it happen.
I made it happen!
And that's okay. Hope it's a good death.
I'm left travelling on my own because there's no one else.
I've come to help. I'm the Doctor.
You? Trapped in your box?
Yes.
Let the TARDIS die. Just let this old box gather dust.
I was going to take you to so many places.
Stay with me. I promise I'll get you out alive. That's the decision I've got to make for every living thing. Right then, I'll be off. Unless, I don't know, you could come with me. Not like this. Not with this daft old face.
And that's how you live with yourself.
You could stay here, or you could go, anywhere. Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once! Everybody lives! Oh, Rose, they're all dead. Die as a human or live as a Dalek. What would you do?
And if you want to remember me, then you can do one thing.
The world is in your hands.
That's all. One thing.
Have a good life. Do that for me, Rose. Have a fantastic life. Absolutely fantastic.
And you know what? So was I.
Series 1 is a brilliant series of Doctor Who, and it remains one of my favourites of the entire show. Structurally, thematically, and emotionally, this series is still possibly the most cohesive to date. Series 1 was a massive risk, and it paid off masterfully. Frankly, it's easy to forget just how influential and impactful this series was, which I think, rather ironically, stems from the series being so good in the first place. Series 1 of New Who builds on the foundations that were starting to appear during the 7th Doctor era, series arcs, personal character drama, and deliberately avoids the mistakes of the TV movie, and ends up reinventing the wheel and kickstarting a cultural phenomenon. One of the main reasons it works so well is because it avoids overloading the viewer with too much baggage. There's no lore dumps about the seal of Rassilon or Zarbies or who Koshé is. Things are kept simple, with minimal references to the show's past. In fact, the references are so small and vague that I imagine it was hard to tell if Series 1 was a continuation of Classic Who or a complete reboot. Obviously, stuff like the return of Sarah Jane in Series 2 confirmed that this is the same universe as the classic series, but that's exactly it. The show didn't try to overwhelm its audience. It eased them in slowly, and when there are major references to the show's past, they're reinvented in incredibly impactful ways, the main example being the Time War. Yet the idea of making the Doctor the one who kills his own race was a bold one, but a brilliant shake-up to the formula of the show, and a huge aspect of the Doctor as a character in the revival. The whole Last of the Time Lords thing has massively overstayed its welcome nowadays, but that doesn't change the fact that, for a long time, it was a defining part of the show and the Doctor as a character. The Ninth Doctor receives a brilliant arc over his series of learning to love life again, accepting that not everyone has to die all the time, and overcoming his guilt and trauma by learning that he is still a hero who can make the right decision. This narrative is a defining part of the Doctor's character for the first 7 series of New Who, with the aftermath of the arc bleeding into the Capaldi era a little. It's honestly crazy how impactful yet natural the Time War feels as a plot point. I remember getting into Classic Who for the first time and being genuinely surprised when I found out Gallifrey and the Time Lords were just chilling there the whole time. I just assumed the Time War had always been a thing. On a semi-related note, I think the Daleks are at their best in the RTD era, and I think Series 1 contains their 2 best outings. Episode 6 single-handedly revived the Daleks, salvaging their reputation and making them a truly formidable threat once again. And the series finale puts this really fascinating cultish spin on them, setting up the themes of desperation and self-loathing and imagination that appear in future Dalek stories. The only returning villains in this series are the Daleks and the Autons, which are great choices. The Autons are incredibly easy to understand, and the Daleks are just iconic. But again, they work because they aren't bogged down by references to the past. Episode 1 doesn't feel the need to call back to Spearhead from Space or Terror of the Autons constantly, and Episode 6 contains a vague reference to Davros, and that's it. The reboot aims to put the mystery back into the Doctor as a character. Again, this was another idea that was attempted during the 7th Doctor era, but Series 1 leans fully into it, and it works a treat. The 9th Doctor feels like he'd fit in with all the classic Doctors, but he still feels fresh. He's got a pragmatic, grounded feel which lends itself really well to Christopher Eccleston's salt-of-the-earth Mancunian demeanour. The 9th Doctor has great character development, and he's just an all-around fun Doctor to watch. He's dry and gritty, but he feels like you could sit down and have a good chat with him about literature. Or Oasis. He's flawed, but you still root for him, and it's clear he means well under his gruff exterior. Mentioning Oasis just now has just made me realise he would definitely call you a posh twat if you told him you listened to Blur, but it's fine, I love him anyway. The 9th Doctor is criminally underrated. Thankfully, you don't see many people telling you to just skip 9 nowadays, but it still feels like Eccleston doesn't get nearly enough credit for his performance as the Doctor, and for basically being the reason the show was such a big hit. With all the shit going on in his work life and personal life at the time, he still delivered a killer performance and really got the character he was playing. It's a real shame he only left after one series. But given what we know about what things were like on set, I commend him for putting his professionalism and morals above all else. Honestly, ending Series 1 with a regeneration really does make this the quintessential series for getting into Doctor Who. This series has pretty much all the essential stuff you need to know about to get into the show. Other than Heaven Sent, but hey, can't win them all. Even though Series 1 is definitely a complete fresh start for the show, it does still feel like a natural progression from the end of Classic Who. This isn't really about the plot, but the overall aesthetic of the estate where Rose lives just feels really similar to the setting of Survival, the final Classic Who episode. You could also draw some parallels between Father's Day and The Curse of Fenric. Ace was also a massive step in the right direction in terms of portraying strong, independent female characters, and it very much feels like an Ace walked so Rose could run kind of thing. Doctor Who was always known for being camp and a bit cheesy, and those aspects very much carry over into the reboot. I think it works well a lot of the time. The game show parodies in Bad Wolf are a pretty good example of this. Sometimes the show does swing it too far though, like with the Slitheen. But the series does still take itself seriously when it wants to, and has great emotional beats that more than make up for that cheesiness, as well as insightful social and political commentary, a lot of which really hasn't aged a day. So yeah, I really like Series 1. It remains an all-time great that I'd love to revisit. Thank you very much if you watched this whole thing. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you learned something new along the way. Well, I'm off to go watch Falsettos and Resonate Concrete now. See you later this year for the big one, and remember... Oh, no. Run for your life.